All right. At this point, Rudy, since you've actually piped up, you'd be up next on the agenda. Do you want to take it away at this point?
All right, sure. Let's do this. Um,
You should be able to share your screen.
can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right, so let's get started. Um, I do not like monologues. I find them very discouraging to the presenter. So by all means, if you have a question, chime in. I think that's going to make it a lot more interesting for everybody. So why are we having this talk? Obviously, Ken, you approached me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in presenting on a topic?" And I'm always in favor of sharing best practices, anything exciting with the rest of the club. In this particular case, I felt even more strongly that this is a topic that doesn't get a lot of attention. We get plenty of conversations around how you improve an individual station's performance, but it is not, there isn't a lot of information out there how to go about if you're building a multi-op station. And this also coincided with my, I guess, two latest efforts to run a multi-op. And there were a lot of aha moments, a lot of things that I should have known. Well, I did know, but I never considered. And I said, you know what, this is actually a good topic to have. So there you have it. Again, why are we having this? I do want to share my personal observations. Admittedly, my sample size is small, having organized only two of these events, or at least on a large scale. I do want to help others that are in my shoes that are trying to attract and build teams. They're just getting started. Um, Honestly, I would love to hear from the big multi-op stations as well and get their feedback, their best practices, and so on. They're by and large silent on how we go about building a kick-ass team. And last but not least, I need this for my own purposes, my selfish purposes. I haven't given up on the idea of beating up my own station, HQ9X. And during our last operation, we reached the conclusion that Canada, at this point, is no longer constrained from a technical standpoint, from a hardware standpoint. It is all about the team. And that's the biggest opportunity to make more progress. So what are we going to cover? It's fairly straightforward. There isn't anything technical in nature. There will be no pictures of palm trees and ocean beaches and things like that. We'll be mostly talking about goals, skills, skill building, strategy, optimizing station performance, again, mostly from human perspective, as opposed to antenna and amplifiers and equipment and so on. And last but not least, seeding the idea for continuous improvement. Again, the focus being on the team more so than the station or anything physical per se. So let's talk about the how. And I've learned that planning is very important. And the reason I'm saying this is because I'm the worst planner and the worst project manager known to mankind. Even though I've been running projects for my entire professional career, I always depended on other people that do project management for a living. They're really good at it. And I was able to get by. But in this particular case, I'm the one doing the project management. And again, I felt that it's very important to put everything in writing to make sure it gets done. So let's talk about the leap. And last November, as I was sort of taking a break after my shift and I was having lunch and I was looking at the Observer computer and looking at what's happening in the shack, I had a couple of revelations. I think I should have had those revelations earlier that made me think why the team was not performing as it should be. And just to be clear, these were operators that were very skilled. This was not their first rodeo. Individually, they had done very well, but somehow put them all together. I expected that we'll do better. So I broke down the sort of the problem into four main areas where people need to make the leap from a single op to a multi-op. And again, my assumption is that those are good operators. They don't necessarily need the basic foundational skills of how do I run, how do I work multipliers, how do I use my logger, and so on. So the big revelation was that we probably had diverging goals. A lot of the guys that came and joined me, their main goal was really to have fun. What I mean by this is fun manifested themselves in different ways. Some of them were significantly antenna restricted, therefore they had never worked XYZ DX from Greater Toronto area. They simply don't have the ability to hear the XYZ DX. Likewise, they like running. They wanted the opportunity to have all the power, all the antennas, all the support to be able to run. Others came for the camaraderie, and I'm not downplaying their desire to operate, but the camaraderie was probably their overarching motivation. Whereas my goals were very different. Again, I'll go back to the mantra I've been repeating for the past 2 years. My goal was to beat HQ9X. I know this was a crazy, lofty goal, but this is what we were gearing for. And even though we had a number of conversations, mostly over email, how we're going to get there, I didn't feel that that was a shared goal. The second thing I realized was that there was a different set of skills. And again, I'm not talking about the basic skills, how you run or how you use your logger, but skills such as knowing propagation patterns from different parts of the world, or skills related to using the in-band radio, skills related to how you handle the fortunate situation where you have different antennas. Why do you need different antennas? Why do you need to manage the stack as opposed to just push it permanently, antennas on? And more importantly, skills for those operators coming into this operation were previously impacting only their own score. So there wasn't a spillover effect across the entire team. Whereas when you do the multi-op, the idea, if you do it right, is to bring people that have complementary skills, and together they achieve the goal as opposed to individually. So that was really a big moment as well. Strategy, it's probably somewhat related to the other two. It's a combination of people having different objectives, ultimately come up with different plans for how they're going to execute on these objectives. And in a way, I'm thinking that having or being a single op may require a more sophisticated strategy, because you have a lot more band changes. You're the only person responsible for everything. So you need to take into consideration time and this and that. Whereas in the multi-op environment, the strategy is distributed across the entire team. But I also realized that the strategy is slightly different. When you make decisions, for example, to move, the decision, at least in the context of Secure Worldwide, is a little bit more complicated. You have to keep an eye on the clock. You also, in the case of stations with in-band radios, you have to think about how do you make the most out of the in-band radio. Even though I've used in-band radios in the past, I actually realized that we didn't use the in-band radio to its fullest potential from the very beginning, because initially we were using it only for what it says, in-band. Later, after an hour or two, we realized that it has a lot more value, a lot more potential if we use it to hop around and chase multipliers when the other two stations were running. And later, and I'll show you the numbers, that actually turned out to be one of the reasons we didn't do as well as we wanted to do, because we missed on a significant opportunity to make QSOs, points, and multipliers. And last but not least, the obvious one, if you're a single op, it's so much easier to operate a station because you know it very well. You know its strengths, you know its weaknesses, you know where the skeletons are. Whereas when you come to a new station, there are a lot of things you need to learn. I was particularly, I guess, shocked by the fact that operators that had identical transceivers came to the station and struggled using the very same transceiver. And not because they didn't know how to use the transceiver as a sort of baseline transceiver, but once you stick it in a multi-op environment where you have a lot of additional interference, things that are not as important in a single op environment, such as managing RF gain, filtering, and so forth, become very apparent. So again, fairly steep learning curve. So let's look at, by the way, do you see the list of participants in my screen share or not?
Yes, I see them.
All right, let me figure out how to get rid of it. Okay, this is better. So let's start with the goals. And I think this is very important, very foundational to whether or not you as a team leader or multi-op station operator actually going to achieve your goals. I think it's obvious, but at least I didn't practice until this time. It's very important to balance the personal versus the team goals. Some of it is related to repeating like a broken record. This is what we're trying to achieve. This is why we're doing this operation, and so on and so on. But also it's very important to make that balancing tangible. So, and we'll talk about this later. For example, giving your operators the opportunity to, for example, run if they want to run, or master in-band operation, whatever the case may be, it's very important to take the time and really understand what everybody is trying to get out of this operation. Cannot emphasize communicating the goals well in advance, not once, not twice, probably 100 times, and then do it again. I do believe in setting challenging goals so that people get excited. If it's yet another operation, probably you're not going to attract as many people as you hope for. So the little screenshot on the right illustrates what our goal was, right? We wanted to move significantly higher in the ranking. And even if we couldn't outdo HQ9X, at least be on top in Canada and ideally in North America. Is it a hard goal? Absolutely. Does it have a dose of reality and attainability? Absolutely. So I think having that balance really is very important. Make it challenging so that it's fun, but at the same time, make it attainable. Otherwise, people would not believe in the goal and would not show up. So the next one is about skills. I do not have a super station, which means I don't have unlimited supply of operators, and hence my stance that beggars can be choosers. What I mean by this is you work with what you have and you optimize the skills, the experience of the individual operators that show up. To be clear, when I say skills, I take a very broad brush defining what a skill is. Could be operating, could be health and stamina issues. Not everybody can work the graveyard shifts, technical, and so on and so on. So the idea is you align the goals, you align the skills, and ultimately that feeds into your strategy. The reason I'm sharing or showing the, let's see if I can move this, the schedule on the right is because I use it to illustrate how the schedule can actually operationalize the combination of skills, goals, and strategy. So in this particular case, I wanted to make sure that I'm available to everybody at the very beginning of the contest and at the same time give folks the opportunity to run. So I said, you know what? I'm going to sit in the in-band radio. I'm not going to run like crazy. I'll let Dennis and Wes have as much fun as possible. But at the same time, I'm going to contribute to picking up multipliers and just as importantly, be available for the team if they need help. Harry, for example, said, you know what? I turn into a pumpkin after midnight. I really cannot operate very late. Therefore, make sure you don't schedule me to operate late at night. So this schedule is an example of how to balance individual goals and preferences to come up with a team that is cohesive. I guess narrowly in the context of the schedule, one of my concepts is you really don't want to have shifts that are longer than 4 hours. And this has nothing to do with stamina. This actually has to do with sleep patterns. So the human body sleeps the best when it sleeps in intervals of 1.5 hours. So the nearest 1.5 hour to 4 hours is 3. So my assumption is 3 hours of sleeping, half an hour to get out of the shack, take a shower or whatever, unwind so that you can take a nap, sleep for 3 hours, and then make yourself a cup of coffee, possibly breakfast, something, and be fully refreshed. So that's how I came up with the concept of the 4 hours. The map, I mean, the schedule is also very important to show you where you have weak spots in your strategy. So in this particular case, if you look all the way to the right, the in-band radio doesn't get a lot of attention during the night shifts, which again was something we should have reconsidered because we realized that we missed on a lot of opportunities. So don't underestimate the schedule. I think it's a very important tool to, again, align goals, take advantage of individual skills. And if you're running a multi-op station, one thing I would like to share, what everybody told me is, Rudy, thank you for putting a schedule. We've been to other stations where a single op hogs the radio for unpredictable and extended periods of time. I didn't feel I had enough BIC. I didn't feel that I had a lot of fun. I may or may not come again. So I'm a big believer in the power of schedule. So the next one is the strategy. I already mentioned that the schedule is one of the simplest ways to introduce your strategy into something real and tangible that people can follow. The strategy really needs to be the operational, I guess, roadmap for making the balancing activities, for the prioritization that takes into consideration goals and skills. Certainly, the strategy has the basics that you would expect in a single op activity, which is assuming you're not multi-multi, such as when and on one band do I go at any given time? How do we strike the balance between chasing multipliers versus running? In our case, how do we take advantage of the in-band radio to its fullest potential, be smart about it? So these are really, really important questions to address in the strategy. I already emphasized enough about the impactive goals and skills in crafting the strategy. But I think the strategy also needs to take into consideration the competition. We are never the smartest person on the bench, so why not take advantage of what others have achieved and demonstrate it, even talk to them. I was actually going to stop at VA2 Whiskey Alpha's QTH on my way to Canada this time, but I ran out of time, so I think I'm going to do it next time. I do believe in talking to people and comparing notes and learning from each other. I actually called V3J and I asked him a simple question. I said, John, how do we beat you? I was totally blunt, right? That was my goal. How do we beat V3J? And he was likewise very honest, very transparent. He said, well, your best bet is probably in-band radio because he doesn't have one. And according to his own estimates, he is probably missing on 15 to 20% uplift in his score. So that was one of the reasons I really doubled down on building in-band capabilities. And last but not least, my God, I cannot emphasize enough knowing the details of the contest rules. This is particularly critical when it comes to multi-single and multi-tool, not only with respect to band changes, but what each radio can do. I spent the entire weekend repeating the rules probably 100 times or so and giving examples of what we can and what we cannot do in order to comply with the rules. Again, this is a major shift from single up operators, so it is important that you help them to come up with a good understanding of what the rules are. This little screenshot on the right actually shows an example where we failed, right? We had a lot of low rates during the graveyard shifts. And when I looked at what happened during those hours, I realized that those were the shifts where we didn't have operators in the chair that were comfortable either operating the in-band radio or operating with an in-band radio. What I mean by the second point is that operating with an in-band radio requires certain rhythm and certain coordination between the two operators. And if you don't have that chemistry, if you don't establish that rhythm, people don't like it. They find it very disruptive. And also, going back to skills and understanding some of the basics of the station, if they don't know how to interpret what, in the case of N1MM, the network status windows is showing them what the other station is doing, again, you find the in-band radio experience extremely frustrating. So the station, again, I don't want to repeat other things that we've discussed many, many times with respect to antennas and radio selection and amplifiers and RFI management and things like that. Those are given, those are table stakes. In the case of multi-op stations, I learned that documentation and show and tell and training are absolutely critical. Again, one of the reasons we didn't do so well is the vast majority of my team showed up on Friday morning, which meant that we didn't have enough time to sit down, talk about the strategy, do a station tour, do a show and tell of how the in-band radio works, again, go over some of the telemetry you're getting from N1MM or other sources so that everybody has a stress-free operation. Even the operators that had similar radios, again, they could have benefited from arriving a little bit earlier. Button chair, very important. Make sure that the station is comfortable for a wide spectrum of operators. It's very easy, or it's straightforward to build a station that is comfortable for yourself. You know yourself very well. You can figure out what is the perfect table height or monitor height or whatever the case may be. But in the case of a multi-op station, you got to think flexibility. We spend probably 2 days doing various measurements and calculations and things like that, trying to decide whether or not we're going to build a single table, which is what you see on the screen, versus a bunch of individual workstations that have the ability to raise up and down the desk. Ultimately, we settled on height, which seems to work very well for everybody. Excuse me. But then we looked at opportunities to make other elements of the station adjustable and customizable as well. So when you look at the monitors, these monitors can go up and down. They can go closer to the person or away from the person. The radios, the transceiver you see on the left can be pivoted left and right. You can't really pivot the amplifier being 100 pounds on top of the radio, but all these being automatic amplifiers, you don't really need to spend a lot of time with them.
Rudy, just curious, what height did you settle on for the tables?
I don't remember. I have to go back to our calculations and design criteria. We figured that we can address the table height via the fully adjustable chairs
Right.
and monitors. Also, the keyboards are Bluetooth. I do not like wires. There are very few wires in my shack. So being able to pretty much put the keyboard anywhere you want, either in your lap or on the desk, really makes a big difference.
Okay.
Noise and temperature, or the environmental controls in the room, turn out to be very important. I mean, temperature is obvious. Noise, not so much. Particularly, this was a CW contest. What I realized was, just like at home, the kitchen is the most popular room in the house. The shack actually is the most popular place in the entire property. And even those that were taking a break, they would come to the shack and just hang out there. So you need to figure out how you're going to do noise management. I have taken two strategies. One of them is I created an observer PC that is actually in the main house. You don't have to be in the shack to know what's happening. I also have started designing what a noise abatement strategy is going to look like using panels and other methods, because it's inevitable, right? People will continue hanging out in the shack. So if it can make it less noisy or less echoing, I think it's going to be a big win-win for everybody. And then the obvious ones, reliability. Nobody likes operating a flaky station. I can tell you from my personal experience, when I did single ops and my station was not as reliable as it is now, there were times when I would just give up simply because something would fail and I lost any and all desire to go and fix it. I must say, I'm a lousy operator from that standpoint, single op operator. And automation. Automation is very important. And I would also add not only automation, but consistency. The way the station is designed is any position can function as any type of radio. You could be run 1, you could be run 2. If it's a multi-multi, you can be the third radio, or you can be the in-band radio. And I have made everything to be absolutely identical. 2 identical transceivers, keyboards, monitors, you name it. And as of last week, I have also replaced all the amplifiers to be identical. So for all practical purposes, you can sit at any one of these and you would feel in the same environment compared to any other radio. And because the automation is done on the screen, you don't really have any physical controls, except for the rotors that will be moved to the screen very shortly as well. You don't have any physical reason to think you're in a different position. So I do believe in standardization big time. And by the way, going back to my observation that people with identical radios actually struggled how to use mine, I came up with the idea that since the icons have the ability to store profiles, configuration profiles on SD cards, next time what I'll do is I'm going to create a profile for every single operator. People are different. People have different preferences. CW pitch frequency, for example, turn out to be vastly different across everybody. And considering we already have the ability to do this type of customization, I don't really see any downfall to make that customization available for each and every radio. One other reason, by the way, now that I'm looking at the picture, one other reason why I decided to enforce customization, including for the amplifiers, is because when this picture was taken, I had 3 different amplifiers, and they required 3 different drive levels. So you might be using the radio on the very left. You're just used to using 25 watts to get full power on 40. Then you move to another radio, and because it's a different app, different gain, different tube and all that, suddenly that 25 may not be enough. But because you're not paying any attention, you're not maximizing the power that you can use. So for next contest, everything is 100% identical. So learn and iterate. And frankly, I think we can actually do a complete separate session on this, because I do believe looking back, doing a post-mortem is a great way to learn from your operation, identify your strengths, identify your weaknesses as a team, and figure out how to grow in the future. I basically look at our lessons learned not as a pointing fingers or faulting anybody or anything, but hey, if we want to have fun, if we want to do this as a team for the next 2, 5, 10 years, what are the things we have to work on in order to get better and better? So look at all data sources that are available. Look at the human aspects, look at the station performance, decide whether or not your strategy was sound, whether or not you could have adjusted the strategy as you go along. Use the opportunity to solicit feedback from your team during the contest. I had plenty of informal chats with various members as we were sitting in the kitchen and having coffee or eating lunch or whatever. These are wonderful because everybody's impressions are fresh. And that's a good time to capture that feedback. Now, I also asked everybody after the contest to sit down and write me an email with everything they thought worked well and didn't, and things we should change. Some of it is reflected here. But again, feedback is such a gift. It's such a blessing. Make sure that you don't forgo it. The little picture on the right shows one of the data points I had gathered during the contest. It illustrates how we can get to the point where, again, don't laugh at me, where we stand the chance to beat HK9X. Between better rates, between better multipliers, use of the in-band radio, my idea is not as crazy and insane as others have tried to convince me. Other considerations, I already mentioned this, beggars can be choosers, so you work with what you have. And it's really important that you're thoughtful. Chemistry is very important, compatibility is very important, and commitment. Commitment not only in terms of I am going to show up for the contest, but also commitment to both the goals of the team, as well as making sure that we follow the rules and just play nicely as ethical contesters. Diversity skills, I try to reflect some of that in the schedule, not only at the team level, but also at the operating schedule level, making sure that you have a little bit of everything for that shift. You have a great run up, you have a great multiplier up, and ideally somebody that is more technical in case something does break or fails during the contest. I got so frustrated with people not reading. Oh my God. You have no idea how many emails I had sent around the strategy, around the operating schedule, the propagation, every single detail you can think of. Again, I'm a lousy project manager, and I felt that it was important for me to do that homework to make sure we don't miss anything. And the reality was everybody showed up on Friday morning, and it was pretty obvious that they have totally ignored the emails, which I totally understand. I believe this is a lesson learned for me, not something to push on the team. But this means that making time for getting together before the contest and really working through all these details is very important. So to the extent possible, push people to show up on Thursday morning. Make it clear that showing up on Friday afternoon is okay if it's unavoidable. Everybody has normal lives and families and things like that. But ideally, you want everybody to show up as early as possible. Food and accommodations, they really have to be comfortable and I believe healthy as well. It's my personal conviction, and maybe some of it is based on my Bulgarian roots, but I am a firm believer you have to feed your people very well. Don't bring a bunch of bread and cold cuts and things like that and assume that people will be okay with sandwiches and things like that. Food is important. It's a great camaraderie tool, but they also feel that it's a great way of calming people down, creating comfort and so forth. So don't underestimate the importance of food. And obviously comfortable accommodations, especially if you have a small team and people don't get enough sleep time, it is important to give them the opportunity to have a quality sleep during the 3 hours when they're actually sleeping. So yeah, don't ignore this piece. So there you have it. That's Rudy's lesson learned from switching or moving from single op to a multi-op operation. We'd love to hear any questions or even better suggestions from others, how we can do better and beat that elusive HQ9X, guys.
Yeah, I guess just some comments because I'm one of the ops. I've been to several multi type situations, and I could just agree with everything you say. Just being made to be felt comfortable, and the food and all of that is important. Kind of dovetails with my president's, my captain's log from December that I penned while I was sitting at KC1XX during my off times. I know it puts a lot on the multi owners to make all that comfortable, and I really appreciate it. I can understand what you're going through. So yeah, it kind of dovetails with what's important to me when I go visit a station.
Yeah. Anyone else? I know Dennis appreciates the comfortable beds and Paul the food.
And let me tell you, if you have never gone to Rudy's, you do eat well. He is an excellent cook.
That's true, but he doesn't have a swimming pool.
Not in the Klondike, no. But HQ9X does.